I'm having issues with that. Turns out that wasn't the issue. It's the fact that the tip was loose. It didn't have a good connection, so it wasn't heating up enough. So even though I've got 40 watts burning down here, the tip wasn't getting what I needed. Back to the point, this one is a no-name, probably came from, you know, any random no-name electronics store. And knowing who gave this to me, I doubt he spent that much on it. And right now, my favorite soldering iron. My only complaint is it's got a short cord, but it's easy enough to get around. So how much would I spend on it? If you're not going to use it that often, just the little wands are going to be fine. You can get kits that are going to have all the little pieces you need. That's going to have the solder with the built-in flux and the different pieces. It's going to be fine if that's all you're going to do. If you're not going to actually want to do this hardcore and get the setup with the box and the wand and the dial temperature, and yeah, no, this is the one I'm using at this point.
Stop. It's rolling now. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
You may want to re-announce this what happened.
All right.
We're still waiting for Facebook. Yep, Facebook just started. Okay, now you can go ahead.
I'm hearing that some of the streams got interrupted there. So, heavily distracted. It's like, what? Technical problems, what's going on? So, soldering irons, right? That's where I was at. What am I doing next? Because I felt like, well, I could, so depending on what got dropped off with the streams to repeat that, the bit with the soldering iron, if you're not going to use it that often, I've got a no-name, inexpensive 30 watt small tip soldering iron, and that one's been working the best out of all the old Radio Shack soldering irons that I've got. And I'm sure, knowing who purchased that and then gifting it to me before he moved away to Denver, he didn't spend that much on it because he wouldn't. And it's a trooper. It works really well. So I don't think, I got hung up on that for the longest time as well. Turned out it was more my skill and not the soldering iron. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I would get the soldering iron that you can afford. I like the 30 watt. The 40 watt, I don't think I necessarily need. I've seen 15 watts. I'm afraid of those just because I want the soldering iron I want it to happen. I don't want to wait for it to happen. So I've got a 30 watt. Okay. Oh, I'm back online. Well, I know there's a delay, but I'm getting told that the people in the chat left. There may be still some here, but yeah. So I'm still going. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a delay. I'm getting feedback from my family, so I'm not sure. Anyway.
I would do the last two questions, and then we can wrap it, and we'll upload what we're...
Okay. Overheating. Haven't had any quarantine. Going back to some old questions because I don't have any new ones now. Oh, okay. I'm getting asked to. I will go to YouTube and open this up and directly answer Danny Church's question as well. But he was asking about how to attach Velcro straps to foam. I'm actually going to be doing that more with the Gundam cosplay, and honestly, the last time I researched it, I looked at what Punish Props did, because he did a whole little video showing a number of different methods on how to attach things to foam. And the one thing I did differently than what Bill had done is I'm using contact cement. I think he actually used hot glue because it was an older video. But the big one was he actually took the foam and then scarred it up, which gave the glue a place to go. It wasn't just, right, you've actually got pieces to go in. It wasn't just on the surface. Both Velcro and the backpack strapping, which has got a different name, road strapping, are porous enough that the contact cement's gonna just soak into it. You probably need to do 2 layers. 2 coats of contact cement, and it'll just glue directly. Some of the things that I've seen done is you're sewing the Velcro to the backpack strapping and then gluing the backpack strapping on. You can just glue it directly. I'm going to be just gluing directly on the Gundam cosplay, and all I'm doing usually is scarring up the foam and then applying the contact cement.
You got views on your live Facebook, and people
Oh.
are still there, so.
Oh, okay. All right. Holomask. Gene Farley was asking, how's the Gundam coming along? Well, it hasn't progressed since my last video. So he's still over to the side there in the dark with just a head, the torso, and the backpack. But we've been working on getting the arms scaled up. We just got those finished last night. I'm saying we because Joe's helping me a lot with getting these pieces put together. So I've got the shoulders, the biceps, and the forearms all scaled to actually fit the costume, and grabbing patterns from those are pretty quick. But I won't actually be working on building that next stage of the Gundam for probably about 3 weeks, maybe 2. It might be more like 2 weeks when I get started on that. It is coming along. Arms are next, and then we're going to do legs, and then finally it'll be armaments, which will be shield and beam sabers. So that should be fun.
I can give you a question.
Yeah, please. I need questions because I'm not.
Anthony Catallo been trying to make a dog head arm puppet prop. Baskerville from Helsing.
Oh.
Trying to for a while to figure out the pattern but having trouble. Where would you start, preferably with a closable jaw?
So I'm. Anthony was asking. He wants to make a dog helmet from Helsing. He's having trouble actually figuring out the pattern, and what he wants to make is I heard the name. It's been a long time since I've seen Helsing, but he wants to make the dog and then have a jaw that is actually opposable or opens and closes, right?
Closable jaw.
Closable jaw. How would I go about doing it? There'd be a lot of free form for me, where I'm just taking the foam and bending shapes. I would definitely start with the snout because you've got your head. Right, and it'd be really hard to bend it off your own head, so hopefully you've got some sort of head substitute. And I would start with the snout and the upper snout because that's going to be solid and attached to the face, and then kind of start building up around it. And there's a couple different ways to do it because with EVA foam, you're basically building an outside shell as you go. If you were to use the polyfoam, though, what I call couch foam, which you can sometimes find very cheap on Craigslist by buying an old couch, you can actually just carve it. So you start making the solid shape, and you can carve that foam to be the snout, to be the upper part of the head. I was helping one of the costumers from Smosh do that for some rabbit heads that she was working on that actually looked like hairs. They weren't rabbits, they were hares, but they actually had to look like actual hairs, not the cartoon version, and then be wearable for a band. That would be one way, but that definitely involves needing a head substitute. If you don't have a head substitute, you could always do the same thing out of styrofoam. So you start layering up styrofoam, and you could start carving and sanding the dog shape that you want out of the styrofoam, knowing that by measurement it's going to be big enough to go over your head. And then once you have the shape, and really concentrate on just like the left side, right? Rough out the right so you can see that it's going to work out, but really concentrate on, say, the left side. And then use the aluminum foil and duct tape technique for creating a pattern off of that shape that you've sculpted. And then you only have to do the one side because once you got a pattern, most things are symmetrical enough that you can just flip the pieces over left for right, cut out 2 sets and glue it together. Evil Ted Smith has a really good tutorial, actually many of them, on that exact technique. One of them he does the robot from Scooby-Doo, where he literally sculpted the thing out of styrofoam, pulled the pattern, and was able to make it. And that would be another way to be able to sculpt it using simple materials, pattern it using simple materials, and then be able to glue it together with EVA foam. So none of that requires fiberglass, none of that requires a head cast, none of that requires high-tech equipment. So now you've got the upper face done, Once you have the upper face done, then you go into working on the jaw. You sculpt out the jaw, same way, pattern it out. And then when the two of them attach, the upper head's just going to sit on the head, right? The lower half, you'll probably want to have attached. Just use elastic or leather or something that's flexible but not hinged, so it can only go in one direction. And then if you just got it on your chin, it's going to exaggerate because the snout comes out, that when you open your mouth, it's going to open more. And I've seen a number of mascot style costumes that are built exactly that way, where when the operator opens their mouth, the masked mouth also opens up. And yeah, it just makes a larger movement because it's exaggerated out, so you can see it more.
Will Cook asks, on your belt sander, do you use 100, 220, or does it vary?
So Bill Cook is asking, what grit of sandpaper am I using in my belt sander? And it varies. Usually it's just sitting at 120. Oftentimes I'll go down to 80 because I don't have a whole lot of patience. But when it gets to being fine sanding, like using a 220, I'm usually use something else. I don't do a lot of fine sanding on the belt sander. So I would say 90% of the time I'm using 120 for doing anything with EVA foam. And it takes it down in a real hurry. There we are. Joshua Hughes is asking, when did I start doing YouTube full time? When I started actually doing YouTube full time was just, well, there was an overlap. I went to weekly in September of 2019, and that was kind of the beginning of me going full time, but I was still working full time at that point. So when I stopped working full time was the October 4th. So since October 4th of last year, my only job has been YouTube. So I've been YouTube full time for almost 6 months now. No, it is 6 months today. Wow, all right. Oops, my phone went to screensaver. Okay, yeah, please.
Danny Church wants to know, what's the best way to attach Velcro or straps to foam?
Oh, I started answering that one once. Okay. Did he ask again?
Oh, yeah, I think he did.
Oh, okay. I started answering this one once. Maybe that was when the streams were off a little bit. But Danny Church was asking how to attach Velcro straps to foam. I'm actually doing that in my Gundam cosplay. And Bill Duran with Punished Props has a video specifically on just that subject. The main thing that I'm doing with mine is I'm either using the sew-on Velcro, or if it's the two-sided Velcro, I actually took a heat gun and melted the loop part, which is the fuzzy part, to make it flatter. And I'm using contact cement. And the big secret, or the big additional step, is taking my razor knife and adding score marks onto the foam. These are a little deeper than they probably need to be. But that allows some extra surface area for the contact cement to actually kind of get into the foam a little bit. Yeah, I've cut it up, but the contact cement glues it back shut, right? And then you're going to put Velcro right over it. But this gives, I believe the proper term is a tooth for the glue to actually grab a hold of. And also doing 2 layers of 2 coats of contact cement. So I put my first coat on the foam, first coat in the Velcro, let them set up. Then you go back and do a second coat on both. Because the first coats will really sink in, and the second coat will sit on top and be a little thicker and a little gummier, and then stick them together. The costumes that I've done using that haven't failed me, but I haven't done a lot of big hardcore marathons in those costumes. Oftentimes, like with the old Guar costumes, we would literally end up stitching it on as well. It would be glued on contact cement, but then we'd go back and either rivet it or stitch it on as well. But those costumes had a lot of weight to them because they weren't EVA foam. They were cast latex with expanding foam inside and leather straps and plastic straps. So the costumes were actually pretty heavy, and the costume parts were pretty heavy. So there's a lot more stress on those straps. At this point in time, with the way I'm building and most everyone else is building, the costume parts are so much lighter, I don't think the need for sewing it is necessarily there anymore. Another thing you can do is actually sew the strap to backpack strap. It's that, just, it's the road grain strap, whatever it's called. So you could sew the Velcro to that, and now you've got a really porous thing to put the glue on to glue it to your EVA foam. And I think Bill Duran was actually doing it with hot glue, and it was working out for him. So, but again, I'm in Sacramento, and in the summer, hot glue doesn't survive in the car, so I try not to do anything hot glue that's going to have to leave the building.
I don't know if you need it.
Sure.
He asked this earlier, but I think he might have missed it on. It was
Okay.
Josh who was asking about after Gundam cosplay is done, would you consider doing another cosplay oriented items like Power Rangers, Megazord?
Okay. So I'm hearing from Joshua, once the Gundam's finished, would I consider doing another big full cosplay in multiple steps? And he's asking about maybe Power Rangers or the Megazord or a Xenomorph. Xenomorph, wow. Okay, Xenomorph has been one of those like long-term background back in high school. It's like, oh, I want to do a Xenomorph. At that point in time, everything would have been cast. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing another one. I think that is a trend that I will be continuing. Will it be Power Rangers? I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on anything, except for maybe Mechagodzilla, because that's something that interests me. But I will definitely be doing more big projects, big multi-step projects, full body. So that's definitely going to be coming up more. Would I consider doing those other things? Yeah, I would consider doing most anything. I've been wanting to do the Red Ranger's sword for a long time, and I think I finally sourced how to get a hold of the Morphin coin in order to have that detail, which was the one detail I got hung up on not being able to do. Because they're not easy to 3D print because the files don't exist. They get put up and the Zaban takes them down. So I think I found a source of a coin locally that I'm going to be able to cast, so I'll be able to actually make the Red Ranger sword. But that's still a little ways out. Don't expect that next week. Oh, okay. Typos. Fun. Alrighty. Ben Film says he's had a lot of problems with sealing his foam, and no matter what I do, it still cracks. What should I do? I'm going to immediately make a couple of assumptions here. So we've got our foam, and we've used contact cement to put all the seams together, right? So everything's glued together, and let's pretend that Ben has done a better job than I have, and the seams are perfect. Everything lines up. He sanded it. It looks great. Then you come along with Plastidip, which has been forever my favorite sealing method, and you spray Plastidip on it, and all the seams start to open up. That's because the basic solvent in Plastidip is the same basic solvent that's in contact cement. It's xylene or something like that, something wonderfully toxic that us here in California can't get a hold of. And so it causes the seams that are under tension to open up a little bit. And that is frustrating. When I built the super suit for Beyond Geek, what I ended up doing was after I got all the pieces glued down, I would take a low temp hot glue gun, and I would do a close speed of hot glue, working in a small section at a time. And then I had the smooth label back from like a postage label or some other large sticker. And then I would smash that onto it and hold it down. That's why it's low temp, until it dried. And then you could peel that off, and it's very smooth. And now you have a barrier between your contact cement and your Plastidip, so the xylene in the Plastidip won't reactivate the contact cement. And as I talk about it, chances are wood glue would probably be a fine barrier too, and a lot easier to do. I think I was just in a hurry. So that's what I have seen, and knowing that you can actually get Plastidip in a can. That's the way it originally came before it got in an aerosol. And people would take that and thin it with xylene to brush it or even spray it, which don't spray xylene without having all sorts of protective gear on yourself, because that is some wonderfully toxic stuff. But it does work. And so, yeah, you need a barrier between your contact cement seams and your Plastidip, or they will split open. I hope that's the right question. Wesley Tanner is asking, how do I go about drawing the patterns so the separation of the curves are cut out correctly? How do I go about drawing my patterns? Well, I'm drafting my patterns off of a three-dimensional object. Maybe the question is, how do I know where to put my pattern lines? A lot of that, a little bit, unfortunately, is experience. And so what I'm looking for is peaks. So on a head, I would be doing a line across the brow because that becomes kind of a hard point and a little bit of a peak. Definitely on the symmetrical points, the top of the head, that's going to be where I want to put a seam. I like doing, so down the side of a head, I like doing long strips because I think about it like how a globe, a paper globe is made, and when you lay it out, or a beach ball, you get these long banana shapes. So I kind of make long banana shapes going down my head. I've seen other patterns where they'll do a triangle in the front and then a square and a triangle in the back, and that works as well. That's more like how I did this one, where it's got a series of trapezoids that make up the head. But I've liked the dome shapes that I get from the banana shapes. So how do I know where to put my pattern lines? Look at how stuff is sewn together a lot, which, you know, I'm sure a lot of people haven't necessarily done, but there's not a lot of difference between how your shirt is sewn together and how you're going to want to glue together your Super Saiyan armor. The seam lines are going to be in a lot of the same places because it's fitting on the same basic humanoid form. So that would be kind of a lot of the places where I would start at how I'm going to put my seams on. Look for the high points, and if it's a big compound curve and I know I'm going to have a harder time making one piece fold over to it, then I make it into a number of smaller curves that can glue together. So Jason was asking me, what was my favorite real job before YouTube? What was my favorite real job? Well, honestly, just before I started working for YouTube, what I really enjoyed, I was working for the local PBS station in Sacramento, KVIE, and I was the video editor. And I did that for a number of years. And that was really enjoyable because I was, as I call it, the third string cameraman, right? When the main cameraman was busy and the second cameraman was busy, it's like, oh, hey, Odin, can you go out and shoot? Oh, sure. But getting to edit the mini documentaries constantly was enjoyable. And during that time, I managed to win, or I earned, whichever, win 3 Emmys. So I'm a multi-Emmy award winning editor through PBS. Prior to that, my favorite job from about 20 years ago was probably working for a company called Play Incorporated. Play Incorporated was developing a product they called the Trinity that would take standard definition video, and then you're able to do switching with it, editing and effects with it all in one box. This is in Pentium days, right? So even though computers can do it easily now, this is 20 years ago, you know, bear skins and stone knives. And then you're able to take that signal and compress it and stream it out so people on 56K dial-up modems could watch live video over the internet on their real player. And for 2 years, I was part of a project called Play TV, where we were streaming live video 12 hours a day, 5 days a week from multiple locations using this technology. And I was on 2 of the different shows that came out of in-house. There was one from noon to 2 and another one that ran from 4 to 6. And that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. Making internet video 5 years before YouTube. I can remember working with, because this is what, 98, 99, 2000 when we were doing this. YouTube is 2004, I think. Feel free to correct me. I can remember wondering how they were going to pay for their servers because of what it cost us just doing that little bit. When they wanted to make it free for everyone and have everyone come up, and then Google bought it and went, oh, okay, well, that's how they're going to deal with it. That makes sense. So favorite jobs, making actual broadcast television and working in a pioneer fashion for doing live streaming video, just like we are today, 20 years ago for 56K dial-up, bear skins and stone knives. How do I cut sword edges without power tools? So King Jake 2511 is asking, how do I cut sword edges without power tools? What I've been doing is cutting stuff on a bevel. I'll go ahead and take this piece here and do it again. So if this was the edge of the blade, what I've been doing is, well, big secret here is to actually make sure your knife is sharp, right? If you don't have a sharp knife, this isn't going to work. And sword edges are long, so this is a little bit more difficult to do on something that's going to be 3 feet long. But see, I'm holding the blade on an angle, I've got some pretty good pressure. I can feel the tip of the blade dragging into the cutting mat. And then you glue them back to back. And you can, this is wider than I'd want to make a sword. But that is one method for doing it. So you cut out the two halves of your sword, you cut your edge on a bevel, and you glue it together. If you don't want your cut edge to be on the outside, I've glued it together this way with a thinner foam. And then you flatten it out a little bit. And now you've got the factory edge going all the way around. But at this point, I would actually have to walk off camera to get it. There is, you can buy triangular EVA foam dowels, right? They come in bags. HD Foam has them from SKS Props. So that's this light gray foam. Those are fantastic. TNT Cosplay has them. I think Michaels has them. And my preference for which type of foam is definitely that order, HD first. So this one's round, not a sword, but you can get this in an equilateral triangle, meaning that, you know, it's a perfect shape in whichever size. And they come 10 millimeter, 15 millimeter, 20 millimeter. So when I made the Thundercat sword, the edges when I had made the sword were flat, and then it came back with this triangular dowel and just glued it around those flat edges in order to get the sharp edge point on the side of the sword. And that worked extremely well. It was very fast, very easy, and no power tools. Steve Ellis Dodds. Hi, how's it going, Steve? What has been the hardest thing that I have made? Balanced checkbook? Hardest thing that I have made. Let's see. I was kind of answering that a little bit earlier. Okay, so if I had to pick out something specific, because I was saying, getting something to look right, like the Bumblebee helmet, getting the proportions right, when I'm totally freehanding it is very difficult. Wow, what am I going to pick out here as my most... I'm looking around. Is it even in the shop still? Because I know there's things that... wow, the hardest thing. Yeah, it's got to be anything that was like really smooth. I know getting the top of the portal gun to have as few seams, because at that point I was still a little newer with working with EVA foam, was really a bit of a challenge. Yeah, which one? You know, each project has its own issues, and once I'm done with it, I'm on to the next project, and I often forget about what I did. I think the hardest thing with any one of them is just keeping proportions right. Like my Poe helmet was way out of proportion for the size it should have been. It needed to be a lot smaller and a lot more tighter fitting than what I ended up making. So unfortunately, I don't know if I have a real direct... Oh, it was this! I'm listing off some of the ones that aren't my favorites. Okay, so I've got a fun question from... Isa Bolero asking, when I'm scaling my Pepakura files, how do I properly scale them to my personal size? Okay, so just directly scaling Pepakura within the Pepakura program is a science, I'm not going to lie. I've done it once or twice and found it one of the difficult projects that I've done. So there's a program called Armor Smith Designer, which is actually a really awesome program. And I use that specifically for scaling Pepakura files. What Armor Smith Designer does that is the reason it was made, it has an avatar within the computer program itself that you can scale to your measurements. So you can actually scale it to be all of your measurements, your height, your head size, your waist size, everything. It's got, I don't know, 40 different little points. And then once you have this avatar that's you bring in the Pepakura file, which it renders out in 3 dimensions. You can tell it at what anchor point you want to attach this file to. So it's easy to just pick out the head and it goes on the head. And then you can just scale it. You can change the opacity of the Pepakura so you can see you inside of it. And then you can just, with a slider, scale it in all dimensions equally. And then once it finally looks like it's going to clear everything, you have your file that you can then print out as a Pepakura file at the size that's going to fit. And that was a big way how I started with working with the Rex helmet. Is I had a a 3D file that I then scaled using Armor Designer to fit my head in order to get the size that I wanted. And if it was like 117% or something is what it needed to be. And so then I was able to go back and use other programs in order to take okay, so ArmorSmith Designer, in order to scale up the file using other programs, because the limitation of ArmorSmith Designer, it works with Pepakura files. It loves Pepakura files. You bring in a file that's specifically made for 3D printing that has hundreds of thousands of polygons, the program can't handle it. It looks at it and goes, what am I supposed to do with this? So you end up having to reduce it using something like Mesh Mixer if you're going to be using a 3D printing file within Armor Designer, which is actually what I did with this. But then I used the high-res version to get the pieces that I wanted. Did I go through that too quick? Okay, so Manuel, excuse me, is asking, hey Odin, can I get a tip on how to know the correct measurements for making a glove or a large prop fist? So that one's fun. Usually I just, okay, if it's a glove, I literally just start with a glove that fits and I start adding foam to it. That's how there's a reason the Infinity Gauntlet was built off of a welding glove, partly because it needed to be big. But the Tony Stark glove was made off of a work glove that just fit my hand. And as far as getting the pieces made, I ended up measuring my hand flat and then taking the reference pictures that I had and scaling it so the reference pictures would kind of fit the size of my hand, so I know it would fit. Fit the size of my hand, so yeah, that's a proper sentence. And I could just directly measure off of the printout that I had made to be the right size. And that was kind of how I got the glove going. As far as a fist, a big closed fist, if it's a permanently closed fist, like Mark Hamill's Cockknocker, shouldn't be that hard to do. It'd just make a big oversized fist that you put your hand inside of and hold on to something. Power fists and things, they all just get to be so, because I'm not quite sure which fist you're looking for, like Hulk smash hands from Target. All those things end up being so much larger than your hand. You just kind of make them the size you want them to be that'll fit the rest of your costume. And theoretically your hand should be able to fit inside. But if you really need to have something that's very specific to be worn and articulated, I would absolutely start with a work glove. I think this is actually a jersey work glove, which are very inexpensive. It's basically a t-shirt type material, and I painted it with latex rubber in order to give it a skin. Because a lot of work gloves anymore have fancy silicone parts, and fancy silicone parts are incredibly difficult to glue to and to paint because silicone doesn't like sticking to anything. And this also has a good example of, I don't know if the camera can see it, I've got a lot of cracking happening because this is all done with spray paint. So all this cracking is from myself and other people wearing it, and the spray paint will crack a little bit. So that is kind of the nature of the beast of using spray paint, and why I'm starting to lean more towards acrylics, house paint, and Plat FX paints, because those are all flexible and they shouldn't crack like this. Hendo was actually showing how she made her cable arm, and she used acrylic directly on the spandex to paint in the joints. So she made a cable hand, a cable forearm, and a cable bicep from split loom tubing, the stuff you wrap cables with. But anyway, the pieces in between these hard armor parts were just painted, and she said she's worn it to a couple of cons now, and it's not flaking or having a problem. So that's kind of very promising.
You want to go 5 or 20 minutes?
Let's go another. Well, we're half hour over. We'll go for another 10 minutes or so. Wow. Hot One Fire 866, I think I said that right. I've been having trouble with contact cement not drying all the way. I was wondering if I had any tips for that. So when you're working with contact cement, you gotta wait for it to dry before you can stick it together. One of the things that I've been doing is when applying two pieces of applying contact cement, gluing two things together. This works with the brush too. Just I happen to have the squirt bottle handy. And this is something I saw Ted doing, taking a bit of scrap foam. Come here, hands, and then using it like a squeegee. And now I've got a fairly even coat that's covering all the foam. And that should dry faster because it's a fairly even coating and it's a thinner coating. This should dry faster. I can already see that this one's drying a bit faster. Also doing this, I have done it and I've seen Ted do it. You end up doing two coats. If you're gonna do something that's gonna be under a lot of stress, either from the tension of holding a seam shut or the way you're gonna wear it, put a second coat just like this over the first one, because the first one really kind of sinks into the foam, soaks into the foam. And then once it's dry, you do the second coat and that sits on top and gives you a lot more glue strength. This one's pretty much ready to go. This one's still drying in the center. I have seen people use hair dryers to speed it up. All I have here is a heat gun, and I think that cooks it a little too much. So I'm not keen on hitting my glue with a heat gun, but hair dryers certainly do, because just like white glue and wood glue and latex and a number of other things, contact cement is drying due to evaporation. It's the chemicals evaporating out of it, creating all the fumes. So if there's any way to get air to move over it faster, then you'll get it to evaporate faster. It's just the heat, I think, cooks it. So this is still a little wet in the middle, but it's probably good enough. Usually I wait a little longer. That was just me talking. So let's go ahead and... Now, when I was starting doing this, when I was making the big Guar costumes and I was making the darkness costume back in the 90s, yeah, it would be painting contact cement on with those China chip brushes, like a paintbrush, and it was thick, and it would take 20 minutes for it to dry. And that was just, we accepted it. That was just what happened. Anymore, yeah. So, did that live talk through it, and that's what... thinning it, using scrap foam as a squeegee. It's definitely what's happening. I'm hearing notifications. We're good, okay. Mr. Chicken, has there ever been a project I've given up on? You want me to say this on the internet? Has there ever been? Well, yeah. One of them, it was a project I was doing to amuse myself. A lot of the projects I would do to amuse myself are a lot of fun and challenging until I get past the challenge. And then when it gets down to the work of just finishing it, they wouldn't get finished. So one of them was I was making, for the Playmates action figures, an Enterprise bridge set, original series Enterprise bridge. And I was doing it out of wood because that was materials I had on hand. That one never got finished because it started to get too big of clunky seams, too much going on, too much time being put into it, and it never got finished. And I have, literally at one point, I had a garage full of projects that were never getting finished. And what really helped me to get to finishing projects? Having a deadline of having to put a video out. Now that I've got a deadline for getting a video put out, projects get finished. I kind of live my life in con crunch every week, but I'm getting my projects done. So, as far as have I ever given up on a project that was going to be for a video? No. I've postponed them. What I've done is I've run over, like the Tesseract containment unit from Avengers. That took longer than I wanted it to, so it became a two-part video. That was the solution for having a project that became too big for its britches. But otherwise, since I'm putting stuff on the internet, my projects are both selected that I can finish them, and then I've got a deadline so I can finish them. Okay. I got one. Okay. Oop, I hit the wrong button. Sorry, guys. All right, Carlos Basiloni, that's a great name. I'm building a Thor Ragnarok costume. Any tips on any part of it? I have the top mostly fitted. Just curious how I would think it through. For Thor Ragnarok? Wow, okay. Well, let's see. Because I was going to be building a Thor Ragnarok costume, but then plans changed, and so no, I'm not. That's all layers. I mean, you look at the Thor Ragnarok costume, Thor's gladiator costume, I'm assuming, right? It's effectively layers of leather. And so you can either do that with the foam or you can do it with leather if you've got the money. I would be working off of either, let's see, I'd either get help. Okay, well, I wouldn't make a Thor Ragnarok costume to fit me because I don't have the physique. But I wouldn't want to pattern it directly on myself. I'd be patterning it off of somebody. So taking paper pattern, making that fit to somebody's body form, and then you start drawing your lines out in order to get the parts to make it fit, or using a mannequin, or making a copy of yourself, which is the video I just did. And that was actually done to make a Thor Ragnarok costume, but like I said, plans changed, so that costume's not going to get made. The rest of it, because arm guards and the shin pieces, those are fairly, in costume terms, fairly simple. They may not look like it, but you're basically working with tapered tubes in both places. I've got a pattern for the helmet because I like helmets. I don't know if I talked through that one well enough, because it seems like I would get a substitute body form that would be the right size, and I would put my patterns off of that in order to make the pieces fit. Okay, so one last question I can directly answer from Joshua Hughes. How do I handle the curve of a katana and have it still be sturdy? So I've done it in two different ways. In my 3 swords build, the piece that goes inside of the katana wasn't curved. I used a graphite golf club, and it ran along the very top edge, and then as the katana curved, that's exaggerated, as the katana curved, it kind of kept going straight. And I made sure that it didn't poke out of any part of it. So that was just a straight piece that was hidden within the curve, because katanas have a pretty slight curve, right? When I made the Zangetsu from Bleach, I actually used garden stakes. These are they're made by Ortho, the ones I bought anyway. They're the green stakes. I see them a lot for rose bushes. They have a very thin metal tube inside of a plastic housing. And I ended up using 3 of those, and I actually bent them as I went along. So I had one, I laid it down, bent it kind of to the shape that I wanted, then bent the other 2 to fit, and taped them all together in order to make one that was long enough and then actually had a curve, because then the Zangetsu's got a pretty big curve on it, and a gentle one. And that worked out really well. And I did the same thing with some smaller kukuri blades, only I used wire coat hangers. But again, I bent them to follow bent the wire to follow the blade. And I did that for Grunk the Smasher, because they needed some stunt blades. So I've had a lot of fun. For me, it's been an hour and 15 minutes, and I really enjoy this. Please let me know if you want to see me do anything like this again. I've talked about it. Depends on my ability and availability. But if you like the Q&A, I'm happy to do this some more. If you want, we can set up an AMA on my Reddit, which is just r/Odin Makes, or there's also Odin's Makers on Facebook. If you haven't seen that, I can go in there and do an AMA. And I'll go back and look at your comments here in a little bit and try to answer some questions that I didn't get to live. But I appreciate everyone sticking around for the bonus after show. And if you can, there's plenty more going on with CorinCon for another 7 hours or so. And they also have a artist's alley. So thank you for CorinCon for kicking me in the pants and getting me to appear live and talk. And thank you guys for sitting around and watching me the whole time. Talk to you later.